The rapid pace of technology has now taken the dumb devices by storm, and keeping 2020 in mind, the growth of IoT is going to be accelerated. It would be difficult to slice IoT into multiple domains or verticals because what we are talking about is a development of an ecosystem, a new parallel, and new class of data set. We, in the current capacity of technology, are not able to completely capture the data points of our senses, the way we perceive an object, the touch of a fabric, the smell of a pungent gas. However, IoT would be able to assist us in sensing the various elements of sound, pressure, temperature, humidity, motion, color around us. Armed with this information, you would be able to analyze better, prescribe decision rather than predict one, and prepare yourself for the disruptions ahead. I welcome you to the world of sensor, the world of smart devices, and entry into the ecosystem of IoT.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining in for today's session. And let me go ahead and first of all start off with thanking everybody who has kind of agreed to go ahead and join in for this session, this meeting, this webinar. Saturday, Sunday normally are time for your family, and if you are devoting these two precious hours of yours, I'll try my best to make it productive as well as ensure that you are very much engaged and make sure that even the session which we're going to go ahead and conduct is something which gives you that kind of value which you are looking in for. The session has been defined in such a way that for a good 1 hour, we're going to discuss about Internet of Things, what it is all about, what is the potential, the reach of Internet of Things, and we would also go ahead and discuss a few things here and there about the use case studies. Then we also have segregated 45 minutes to an hour for workshop, wherein I would go ahead and show you all the various sensors, microcontrollers, as well as would try to go ahead and do a demo of whatever we have discussed about. So while we would be looking at a broader picture in terms of how we can go ahead and leverage the potential of Internet of Things, we would also like to go ahead and do a little bit of stuff if we could go ahead and do in our capacity to go ahead and ensure that this is how a prototype model could be built for the Internet of Things. So let me go ahead and start off with the discussion with Internet of Things. And while there would be few more who would be joining in, we can go ahead and start off with the discussion around what we are, who we are, and from there we can go ahead and proceed further regarding what all we are going to go ahead and discuss about. So the agenda of today's discussion is going to be about us, a little bit about us, what we are, what we do, then what is Internet of Things, the architecture, the OSI layer versus IoT architecture. We would not be dwelling a lot over the technology piece of OSI. I've mentioned it, but we could go ahead and draw an analogy for people who belong to a networking background. If you don't have a background, need not worry. You can still go ahead and understand the architecture. We're also going to go ahead and talk about the IoT deployment, uh, the various vertical and horizontal, which we are going to go ahead and talk about in length in detail. And then we are also going to go ahead and talk about some verticals like healthcare, factory, or your manufacturing unit, home automation, and then finally since you have you've patronized, you have decided that you are going to go ahead and spend 2 hours with me, I'd make sure that I'm going to go ahead and make this a value add instead only for a value. So I've engaged, I've added smart contract, which is a combination of the two hot buzzword, which you can go ahead and see, which would be about IoT, that is Internet of Things, as well as blockchain and how these two technologies have integrated and have come up with the solution which are not only in the form of automation, but in the form of trusted, trustless Internet of Things for automation. So uh, let me go ahead and start off about brief about us. Um, we impart knowledge. We are a training and certification organization. We are deep into Internet of Things, and we've been kind of doing this thing from past good more than 10 years or so into various vertical. Uh, I have a very good rich background of 13, 14 years only in wireless technology in various form of security in wireless technology. And I've worked into various domains of networking from wireless to server virtualization to the core unit to security and then furthermore into deep into the certification business of all these technologies and finally moving into the sensor part of it. So as and when you would be discussing the architecture, you will get to know how at each and every layer we have been able to build that capability of training and providing that kind of knowledge which could help any organization to go ahead and build that capability of embracing, of taking that leap of faith and deploying that Internet of Things with the current set of resources they have. So we are into consultancy. We are working with a few of the government. We are also working with few of the private organizations to go ahead and give them step-by-step transition from the as is position they are from a manufacturing perspective. Let me put it, let's say, from a SCADA to a gradual, proper shift or movement towards your Internet of Things. So what is Internet of Things? And this brings or starts with the discussion of uh, how do you define Internet of Things? So uh, it is a network of intelligent connected physical objects which collect and share data. Now, what kind of objects and what kind of data we are talking about? To be frank with you, I would say that Internet of Things has been there in the industry from quite some time. And I would also be kind of blunt into putting that across that it has been there in a different nomenclature and somehow with the microcontroller getting accessible to the various people, household, and different verticals, we had to come up with a nomenclature which was amicably, understandably agreed over by different verticals. And that is why, and that is where we coined up with this Internet of Things concept. So uh, when you talk about connected physical objects, we go ahead and talk about your sensors like humidity sensor, temperature sensors. We talk about motion sensor. You go ahead and talk about color sensors. What kind of objects are being connected with these sensors? Well, microcontrollers. You have your, when you talk about home automation, and we're going to discuss this, we talk about the very own our Raspberry Pi. We talk about Arduino board. We talk about the various other microcontrollers, which are now uh, widely accessible, very uh, low cost, and which could go ahead and be used with the code which are off the shelf, and from there you can go ahead and derive various other forms of automation which you can go ahead and do. So what kind of data do we collect? Well, data again is particular to the sensors which we are deploying. If we are talking about a DHT sensor, we talk about collecting the humidity as well as temperature. But if you're going to talk about a tilt sensor, what we're going to go ahead and talk about the angle and the deviation of the angle from a particular position. If we talk about a vibration sensor, what we go ahead and talk about is the number of vibrations per cycle seconds which a machine would go ahead and generate. So these are the various data or sensors and physical objects which get connected and gets connected to a particular centralized domain wherein we can go ahead and use this data, consume this data, and work on with programs with various languages to an actionable item. And once you go ahead and do that, that is where Internet of Things comes into picture. So I call it as the Internet of dumb devices. Devices like your refrigerator, like your car, like your as simple and as dumb as a lamp, which was simply silent and was sitting on a digital on and off mode, can now go ahead and talk about speak and discuss about the various states which we want to go ahead and move on. So this is going to be widespread and it's going to have a connection wherein there are going to be 50 billion connected devices by the year 2020. That is huge. And I guess that is where a long time back, close to a decade back, we started discussing the IPv6 addressing from, because we could clearly see that with these many devices which were there connected all across overboard, we would have fallen short of the IP addressing schema, and that is where you see that now IPv6 is pretty much solving this issue out of these many devices getting connected on the internet. So, what is Internet of Things? I would say it is a combination of devices, processes, people and data all together included, integrated, and working ahead or moving ahead with a proper actionable item which could go ahead and result into a particular action which we have suggested or which we have thought of. I'll talk about the IoT era, and this basically is to go ahead and share you as to how the transition has happened in the last few decades. We were living into the PC era. We came up into the internet era, and we could clearly see that the number of people who logged onto it was close to 1 billion from 100 million. However, the moment this thing came into the mobile era or the smartphone era, we suddenly had a huge jump, 5 time jump of 1 billion to 5 billion. But what we're talking about in IoT era is something of which is going to be gigantic, something which is going to be huge, and something which is going to be unstoppable because these devices are not only going to go ahead and generate the data between machine to a human, but they would be talking between themselves, which is going to be machine to machine, and which clearly talks about 50 billion machine users by the year 2020. Here is the IoT architecture, and I'll go ahead and take you to step by step so that you can go ahead and understand it. We talk about four stages, and the first stage is where you go ahead and collect the data. These are your sensors. Just as we have our sensory organs and we can go ahead and touch, feel, smell the various things around us, is how we go ahead and use the sensors, uh, which are used to go ahead and either sense the deviation in terms of motion. Either they go ahead and talk about the temperature, or they go ahead and talk about the motion, or they go ahead and look at the change in color. All this data gets collected and goes into the internet gateways or the data acquisition system. Now, this could be anything. It could be your laptop, it could be your microcontroller, which has that kind of memory or RAM, which could go ahead and store it. And then once this is there, from the edge, it moves to the various other servers and to data center or cloud. Now, these things are integrated amongst themselves. So when I talk about edge and data center cloud, there could be your laptop wherein you have a things speak website open or a things work open, and you are basically collating all the data and send it across to the internet or to the cloud, wherein you have a dashboard to go ahead and visualize the data what you have collected. If I go ahead and look in the same architecture, you can go ahead and see the IoT edge things, the edge devices, as we say, which are sensors, actuator, device, appliances, which are connected to the field connectors via various wireless languages. We can go ahead and talk about Zigbee, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, NFC, uh, wireless HART, or Thread. Furthermore, connecting to the smart gateway capability, which goes ahead and manage, store, uh, consume, monitor, and analyze the data. And further, you can go ahead and send it to the cloud using the various languages like MQTT, HTTP, COATP, XMPP, and to the cloud platform. So all in all, and as I would suggest, this is something which is there, which the data transfer to and fro. You don't have a hierarchical structure, and that is why I've just not put this into a hierarchy, because in and out from a cloud, you can still go ahead and connect and still do those particular action which you want to go ahead and commit to a particular sensor. So it could be vice versa too, and that is why the data flow to and fro, and it is bidirectional. So when we go ahead and talk about the deployment, we talk about the in another thing which has permeated to all or most of the verticals. We talk about healthcare, you talk about manufacturing, you talk about home automation, and I simply stop there because we can simply go ahead and move to the various distributed environments like campus, retail store, agriculture, your smart city, smart energy, connected car, heating system, industry. All in all, when you go ahead and talk about any other things, you talk about sensors being widely deployed to go ahead and use for better analytics, from moving from a predictive or descriptive analytics to prescriptive analytics, and collating that data so that we could not only go ahead and understand the behavior of a particular machine, we could also go ahead and work on the causes of dysfunctionality so that we are better prepared as and when the machine may go ahead and become dysfunctional. What is the reach? Well, you got 25 billion connected devices by the year 2020, and the total support of the total service spending is going to be nearing around $3 trillion by 2025. The kind of data which is going to be generated is going to be huge. 1 zettabyte, which is as good as 1 billion terabytes. And it's going to be close to, as mentioned, $1.3 trillion would be accounted for the revenue which would be directly derived from device connectivity and application. And from a use case perspective, oil and gas, manufacturing, movement of SCADA, PLM, to in and out of things from a manufacturing perspective. Smart city, I don't need to go ahead and shout it out because you can easily go ahead and read it. It's there somewhere or the other in one of the newspapers. The kind of impetus the government has been laying, and this has been all across our board to get that smart adjective around each and every component. And let me put it this way. And this is something which would you all would be able to understand. Uh, Probably a decade back, uh, E was a prefix which was considered cool, as in the E health, E zone, and I guess the time is now wherein the E has been replaced by smart, and now people are talking about smart house, smart home, smart office, smart phone, etc., etc. So smart is the new E for this generation. So let's go ahead and start discussing about few of the verticals. And before that, let me go ahead and share you a graph which will tell you about that the kind of growth which Internet of Things has seen and which they are going to see or which we predict for the various sectors in the coming year. So, and clearly connected cars is something which we see a huge growth, and not only from a connected car perspective, even from an ICT perspective of automobile, the internet entertainment factor, the connectivity factor is something, or communication factor is something which is going to be enormous. And we could clearly see that from 2015 to 2019 and 2020, there's going to be a spurt of growth, which is as good as I would go ahead and put across for an automotive sector, kind of looks like Bugatti, which is going to be huge.